The hour hidden in time. There are moments in history that stretch across centuries, and there are others, rare, fragile, almost impossible, that compress the weight of entire civilizations into a single hour. Our story begins with one such hour. Not recorded on clay tablets, not painted on cave walls, not etched into obsidian or basalt. It is an hour reconstructed from traces, a pattern of ash here, a displaced stone there, a strange synchrony in the soil layers of lands that never should have spoken to one another. And yet, they whisper the same rhythm, an echo of something that happened long before history started writing itself. The mainstream fact anchoring this hour is stark and undeniable. Around 13,000 years ago, as the Pleistocene breathed its last chilly breath, humanity stood at a crossroads. In that narrow window, small bands of nomads across the world simultaneously shifted their behaviors, new tools, new symbols, new migrations. Archaeology has long catalogued these changes, but when we compress them into a single hour, they pulse with a strange coherence, like signals aligned on a cosmic clock. But then comes the fringe-colored oddity, the kind that sits awkwardly in museum drawers and academic debates. In 3 separate sites, one in the Levant, one near the Urals, and one deep in Patagonia, researchers found microscopic glassy particles fused to bone and charcoal. Some claim they were formed by lightning strikes, others by volcanic ash. A few, the more daring, have suggested an atmospheric event, brief, brilliant, unrecorded, unified only by the hour it left behind. The particles don't match local geology. They don't match each other. And yet, they appear in layers dated astonishingly close. Scholars still debate whether this alignment is coincidence, correlation, or a genuine global disruption. But the timing teases us, not over months, not over years, compressed, like the last breath before a great turning. Imagine that hour. A quiet evening on the shore of a glacial lake where mammoths had drunk earlier that day. The sun slipping low, casting long blue shadows over meltwater channels. Small human bands tending embers of cooking fires, unaware that something unusual flickers at the edge of the sky. They know migration, hunger, cold, they do not know continents. And yet, somewhere far away, in a land of red earth and coiling rivers, another group pauses at the same moment, looking up. And further still, past jungles and wind-polished cliffs, a third band observes something similar, though none will ever know of the others. The hour leaves marks. One group abandons their camp unexpectedly, leaving half-burnt seeds and cracked flint cores. Another shifts their tool-making pattern as if adapting to new light or new prey. A third alters their hunting path, leaving a strange break in the trail of spear points. Individually, they are small changes. Together, they form the first pulse in our 15-part story, the hint that ancient mysteries may be less isolated than we imagine. This hour also reveals a different kind of truth, that knowledge, long before writing, was flexible. Movements could change because the world changed. Rituals could shift because the sky shifted. Beliefs could collapse or rise in the time it takes for a shadow to move across a cave floor. But history rarely gifts us clarity. Instead, we inherit fragments, charcoal, bone, pottery fragments, footprints hardened into stone. And from these, we must reconstruct the hour that shouldn't exist, an hour where separate worlds seem briefly synchronized, as though nudged by a hand too subtle to name. As we begin this journey, from mammoths and melted glass to vanished cities and collapsing empires, we carry this first hour with us. Not as an event, but as a question. A reminder that history often turns not on grand battles or coronations, but on quiet, unrecorded minutes where something changes and no one knows why. Because sometimes, one hidden hour can ripple across millennia, shaping mysteries we still struggle to understand. When Neanderthals watched the fire. There is a particular silence that surrounds ancient hearths, circles of darkened stone, flecks of burnt bone, pollen cracked by heat. But within that silence hides an hour that reshapes how we think about one of history's most misunderstood beings, the Neanderthal. Not the grunting cave dwellers of old cartoons, not the brutal caricatures early scholars imagined, but real humans sharing real moments around real fires. The kind of hour that makes their world feel suddenly close, almost familiar. The mainstream fact is clear: in a shallow cave at El Sidrón in northern Spain, archaeologists uncovered a 49,000-year-old Neanderthal hearth. Chemical traces showed that someone, perhaps several someones, had cooked mushrooms, roasted goats, and heated medicinal plants. This wasn't survival and panic, it was ritual, routine, perhaps even comfort. A world structured, not chaotic. But then comes the curious twist. Mixed with the ash were delicate flakes of blackened resin, likely birch tar, one of the earliest known adhesives. It required steady heat, a controlled fire, and patience. To create it, someone would have needed to tend a flame for nearly an hour, and that hour leaves behind questions that crackle like sparks in ancient smoke. If Neanderthals could craft tar, did they also pass down recipes, training the next generation in this demanding technique? Or was it the work of a few rare specialists, their knowledge guarded like treasure? Scholars still debate whether this level of complexity places Neanderthals closer to modern humans than previously admitted, or whether the similarities merely reflect parallel solutions to shared problems. It is one of those academic questions that burns hotter the deeper you look. Imagine that hour. The cave ceiling low and soot-stained, the firelight pulsing against stone walls carved by wind long before humans arrived. A small group huddles around flames, not simply for warmth, but for purpose. One individual, broad-shouldered, square-jawed, leans forward, adjusting a bowl-like stone to keep the tar mixture at the right temperature. Another tends meat on a flat rock, the scent rising into the cold night air. A child draws lines in the dust with a stick, mesmerized by the fire but kept just a little too close for comfort. The world outside is harsh, colder than today's Europe, thick with predators. But inside, for 1 hour, there is familiarity, tasks learned, repeated, perfected. And in that sense, the scene is painfully human. We would recognize the small gestures, the way someone pokes the embers absent-mindedly, the quiet murmurs exchanged, the watchfulness of a parent. These are not strangers from a distant past, they are cousins whose story was cut short before we ever had a chance to understand them. Then there's the odd detail that archaeologists still puzzle over: flecks of charred bitter herbs known for their antibacterial properties. Some researchers believe they were part of a deliberate medicinal blend. Others think they simply came from food gathered carelessly. But the possibility is striking, that in this hour, someone might have been treating an illness using the plants of their world, choosing leaves not for flavor but for healing. The hour closes with a scene burned into soil, bones cracked to extract marrow, a thin layer of soot settling onto stone, and footprints pressed into soft earth. Then time swallows everything. Thousands of seasons sweep through the cave, glaciers advance and retreat, and the hearth slowly fills with dust. When we unearth it, the fire has long died, but its message remains warm. It tells us that mystery doesn't always live in lost cities or forgotten empires. Sometimes, it lives in 1 hour where a group of Neanderthals watched the fire, thinking, working, healing, surviving. And perhaps, just perhaps, understanding more than we ever imagined. The lost signal of Jericho. Long before Jericho became a biblical symbol, before trumpets and walls and legendary sieges, it was simply a settlement clinging to life at the edge of a desert. Yet in its oldest layers, deep beneath later structures, there lies a strange hour frozen in dust and limestone. An hour when something happened so suddenly, so deliberately, that even modern archaeologists pause when they reach that sediment line. It is the kind of moment that does not fit within the neat columns of excavation reports. But here, in our quiet journey, it becomes another hour that reshapes ancient history's biggest mysteries. The mainstream fact is straightforward: Jericho is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth, with structures dating back to around 10,000 BCE. Among these structures stands the astonishing Tower of Jericho, a massive stone monument built when humanity had not yet invented pottery. It rises 8 meters high, attached to a wall whose purpose scholars still debate: defense, flood control, or something symbolic. But beneath that wall lies an older layer, and in that layer we find our hour. In the dust just inside the ancient perimeter, archaeologists uncovered something unusual: scattered sling stones, dozens of them, concentrated in a tight cluster as though dropped or thrown within a span of minutes. The stones were symmetrical, perfectly shaped, clearly crafted for accuracy, not chance. Yet there were no marks of invasion outside the wall, no burn layer, no bodies, no signs of battle. An hour of panic is preserved, but its cause is missing. Then comes the fringe-color detail, the one that keeps researchers awake. Mixed with the sling stones were two unusual limestone pellets, each incised with tiny cross-hatched marks. Some claim they were counting tokens, early attempts at recording quantities. Others believe they were ritual objects, carried for protection. But a few whisper an even stranger idea, that these were part of a communication system, a signal that failed or went unanswered. Scholars still debate whether the cluster indicates a brief internal conflict, a sudden false alarm, or a ritual misinterpreted as panic. But none can explain the speed implied by the deposit. It is as if the people of early Jericho dropped everything, tools, food, even the symbolic pellets, and rushed to defend the wall from something that never arrived. Imagine that hour. The city is not yet a city, but a ring of mud brick homes pressed against a towering stone structure that looms like a patient guardian. The air is warm, thick with the scent of reeds drying in the sun. Children run along the narrow paths between houses, goats kick up dust near the outer gate. Then, something changes. A sound. A tremor. A shape on the horizon mistaken for danger. A young man reaches for his sling, the smooth stones kept ready in a leather pouch. Others follow, grabbing weapons not yet meant for war but for hunting. They gather at the inner base of the tower, breathing hard, eyes scanning the desert. Somewhere, a child begins to cry. Someone shouts instructions. A mother pulls her daughter inside. The atmosphere thickens with fear, with anticipation, with the sense that something unspeakable might be approaching. But nothing comes. Minutes pass, maybe an hour. The tension slowly leaks away like water from cracked clay. The defenders drop their stones, let them fall where they may, and return to their tasks, embarrassed or shaken. The tower stands unmoved. The desert remains silent. Whatever stirred them has vanished without leaving a trace. Thousands of years later, when we uncover this moment, we see only the aftermath, stones lying where they fell, tokens scattered like interrupted thoughts. It is a signal without a sender, an alarm without an enemy, an hour suspended in question. And perhaps that is why it matters. For in the world's oldest city, even silence can become an artifact. Even fear can leave fingerprints. This hour at Jericho doesn't solve a mystery, it creates one. And like all ancient echoes, it asks us to listen deeper as we move forward. The hour the mammoths fled. There are moments in prehistory so dramatic we can almost feel the air shift, the ground tremble, the instinctive panic ripple through creatures great and small. One such moment, 1 hour, lies buried beneath layers of ice-age soil across Siberia, Alaska, and northern Europe. It is an hour documented not in writing, but in footprints, deep, chaotic impressions pressed into mud by massive woolly mammoths, musk oxen, and the small human bands who followed in their shadow. The mainstream fact is well known: around 12,900 years ago, at the threshold between the Pleistocene and the Holocene, something triggered a sharp climatic swing known as the Younger Dryas. Temperatures plunged, megafauna populations shifted dramatically, and human groups were forced to adapt with ruthless speed. But within the broad sweep of this transformation lies one particular hour, a sudden freeze and flight recorded in a rare fossil trackway discovered along the Arctic permafrost. Archaeologists uncovered a cluster of mammoth footprints interspersed with human tracks, adults, adolescents, and one small child. At first glance, it appeared to document a hunt. But the orientation of the prints told another story: both humans and mammoths were moving in the same direction at the same time, side by side rather than in pursuit. Something had driven them all to flee, together. Then comes the odd, fringe-colored detail. Embedded within the same layer was a thin line of magnetic spherules, tiny metallic droplets formed only under extreme heat. Some researchers insist they came from a distant wildfire, others propose a cosmic source, perhaps fragments from an airburst. A small but vocal minority suggests these particles marked the exact hour a sudden atmospheric blast triggered panic across the tundra. Scholars still debate whether this was coincidence, just a group moving quickly, or a genuine moment of shared terror as something unexpected swept across the Ice Age landscape. But the alignment of tracks is unsettling, the child's smaller steps stretched unnaturally long, indicating they were running, the mammoth strides are deep, forceful, urgent. Imagine that hour. The sky above the tundra is wide and pale, a dome of cold light. Mammoths graze near patches of hardy grass, their breath rising in white plumes. A small human band watches them from a short distance, not hunting, simply shadowing, as their ancestors had done for centuries. The wind shifts. The air grows suddenly sharp, metallic. A low vibration ripples through the ground, too subtle to name. Birds lift from the shrubs in a frantic burst. Then, a sound. Not loud, but strange, like distant thunder pressed through ice. The mammoths freeze. Their ears tilt. Their trunks rise. Seconds pass. A boom rolls across the landscape, low and trembling, and suddenly they turn as one, massive bodies wheeling in panic. The humans react instantly. This is not the pattern of a hunt, this is survival. They sprint alongside the giants, staying in their wake where the snow is already broken, the path easier. The child stumbles, is lifted, then runs again, small legs straining to keep pace. Whatever drove them, fire, shock, cold, or something they could never name, the moment is brief but furious. Footprints stamp the ground in a frantic braid of human and animal movement. Then, as quickly as it began, the tremor fades. The sky returns to its pale stillness. The mammoths slow. The humans pause, breathing hard in the icy air. They do not speak, because language is not needed, fear is its own vocabulary. Time swallows the moment. Snow drifts over the tracks. Seasons bury them. Glaciers advance, retreat, crumble. But beneath all of it, that 1 hour remains, waiting. When scientists uncover it thousands of years later, the mammoths are long gone, extinct by a combination of climate, humans, and change. But their final panic survives in the earth itself, paired with the prints of the people who ran beside them. The mystery is not simply why the mammoths fled, but why humans fled with them, mirroring the great beasts as though united against an unseen force. And in that alignment, we glimpse the raw edge of prehistory, a world where survival, fear, and instinct tie species together in a single, unforgettable hour. A temple built in one breath. If there is a place where time feels suspended, where 1 hour can stretch into an entire worldview, it is a windswept plateau in the highlands of Armenia, where a small, ancient shrine sits half-buried beneath volcanic soil. Modest compared to the pyramids, humble beside the stone circles of Britain, this structure nevertheless preserves an hour so focused, so deliberate, that archaeologists describe it as a moment of coordinated intention. It is as if dozens of hands moved with a single breath. The mainstream fact is solid. On the slopes near Mount Aragats, excavators uncovered a 6th millennium BCE ritual platform, its stones arranged with mathematical precision centuries before the region adopted organized writing. The platform's centerpiece, an oblong basalt slab, was not carved on site. Isotope analysis shows it came from a quarry nearly 18 kilometers away. Transporting such a stone should have taken days. Yet the soil beneath it reveals something stranger. The sediment directly under the slab contains no intermediate compression layers, nothing to suggest the stone was dragged, paused, adjusted, or rolled. Instead, it appears to have been set down within a single continuous action, the ground beneath compacted in one decisive moment. This is the hour that puzzles experts. An entire temple's focal stone moved and mounted in what seems like less time than it takes to prepare a meal. Then comes the quirky detail, the one that doesn't fit comfortably into standard models. On the underside of the basalt slab, an area no one was ever meant to see, archaeologists found a cluster of fingertip-sized depressions, arranged in a crescent pattern. Some claim they were made by workers testing the stone's texture. Others argue they are symbolic, a hidden signature. A fringe interpretation suggests they might represent moon phases, placed where only the Earth could witness them. Scholars still debate whether the slab was lowered using ropes, levers, earthen ramps, or some unknown combination of tools and teamwork. But they agree on one thing: whatever happened, it happened fast. Too fast. Imagine that hour. The sky is pale gold, dawn just spilling over the mountains. A line of people, men, women, adolescents, perhaps even elders, stands around the newly cleared platform. Their breaths mist in the chilly air. Before them sits the basalt giant, its surface cold, its weight unimaginable. Yet there is a sense of purpose, a rhythm to their stance, as though each knows what must be done. Someone calls out, not a command, more like a chant. The group responds. A rope is pulled taut, another is adjusted, wedges placed, levers angled. Hands grip fiber cords polished smooth by weeks of preparation. Then, at a signal long practiced, they move. Not in jerks or jolts, but in a fluid, unified motion. The stone tilts. Dust rises. A deep rumble vibrates through the ground. Another chant. The group shifts their weight, muscles straining in a collective arc. The stone descends. Slowly, deliberately. And then it settles, perfectly aligned within a groove carved with millimeter care. Silence follows. A moment where nothing happens and yet everything has changed. The stone is in place. The platform becomes a temple. The hour ends. Afterward, the workers carve shallow crescents beneath the slab, a secret mark left in darkness. Perhaps a blessing. Perhaps a warning. Perhaps a message to whatever lies beneath the soil. When modern archaeologists lift the stone thousands of years later, they discover these crescent marks like fingerprints from another world. They find no drag marks, no transitional layers, no evidence of hesitation. Just the imprint of an hour in which dozens moved with a single intention, as though their will was one. In this hour, engineering and ritual blur. Community becomes choreography. And a temple rises not through brute force, but through an unbroken breath of human coordination. It is a reminder that prehistoric people were capable of moments of astonishing unity, moments that challenge what we think we know about the limits of early societies. And from this strange, synchronized hour, we continue our journey deeper into the mysteries of time. The carvings that changed direction. There are few places on Earth where time feels as tightly coiled as it does inside the pale limestone caverns of southern France. Here, the air is cold and still, every sound becomes a whisper, every footstep a soft intrusion into a world that has waited tens of thousands of years. But in one particular chamber, deep within a site discovered only a decade ago, archaeologists found something unnerving, a set of ancient carvings that changed direction within the span of a single hour. The mainstream fact is this: in a lesser-known cave near the Vizier Valley, researchers documented an overlapping cluster of Gravettian engravings dated to roughly 27,000 years ago. Initially, they appeared to be the usual subjects: horses, aurochs, and geometric signs. Yet one panel stood out. The earliest incision lines showed an animal facing east. But deeper cuts, made just minutes later, redirected its body west, as if the artist abruptly reversed the creature's motion. What makes this even stranger is the forensic clarity of the timeline. Microscopic analysis of calcite layers revealed that the two orientations were carved within the same hour, before mineral droplets had time to settle on the fresh grooves. Someone changed their mind quickly, so quickly that we can reconstruct their hesitation 27 millennia later. Then comes the peculiar, fringe-shaded detail. Beneath the changed carving, researchers found a small oval stone, polished smooth on one side and rough on the other. Embedded in its surface was a faint sequence of scratches, repeating in sets of 3. Some believe it was simply a tool sharpener. Others argue it might have been a counting token. A few have suggested, controversially, that the scratches might represent attempts at controlling the direction or meaning of the carved animal, a kind of symbolic reset. Scholars still debate whether the change in direction reflects a shift in narrative, ritual symbolism, clan identification, or simply the artist correcting a mistake. But the precision of the transition, the immediacy, is what makes this hour so arresting. Someone stood before that wall, carving lines into the stone, then paused. Something gave them reason to turn the animal around. Imagine that hour. The cave is dim, illuminated only by a stone lamp burning a mixture of animal fat and moss. Shadows dance across the walls, flickering like spirits in the half-dark. A hunter-artist kneels beside the limestone surface, his breath visible in the cold air. He presses a flint burin against the rock, cutting the first lines with practiced confidence. The horse takes shape, a curve for the belly, a graceful neck, a head angled toward the east, toward the cave's entrance, toward the light. Behind him, a companion murmurs something. Maybe a warning. Maybe a correction rooted in lore. Perhaps the direction carries meaning. East might invoke a season, a clan totem, a dangerous omen. Or maybe the artist simply notices the slope of the wall, realizes the animal's stance feels wrong, unbalanced. He pauses, scratches his chin, glances at the lamp flame sputtering in a small draft. Then he begins again. The westward lines cleanly override the eastbound ones, confident, decisive. The horse is now turning inward, deeper into the cave's symbolic world. The burin works faster now, as if urgency drives each stroke. The polished oval stone lies beside him, catching the lamplight. He taps it once, an unconscious act of rhythm, perhaps a habit learned from a mentor long gone. In that hour, something changes. Not the world, but the artist's perception of it. A moment of revision becomes a moment of intent. When he finishes, he steps back, satisfied or contemplative. The lamp guttering, he gathers his tools and disappears into the dark corridor, leaving behind a record that will outlast glaciers, languages, and civilizations. We find it now, a palimpsest of thought. The eastward lines faint but present. The westward lines bold and final. A freeze frame of human cognition, the oldest evidence, some argue, of artistic editing. The hour in which the animal turned is more than an archaeological curiosity. It reminds us that deep history is full of moments of doubt, correction, imagination. That long before writing, people revised their stories. They changed direction. And in doing so, they left behind mysteries that still guide us deeper into the cave of our shared past. The forgotten hour of Sumer. In the flat, shimmering plains between the Tigris and Euphrates, where humidity clings to the skin and reeds whisper in the wind, civilization learned to count. Not in grand monuments or dazzling myths, but in quiet, everyday gestures, a pebble moved from one bowl to another, a line pressed into wet clay, a seal rolled across a tablet to record a promise. And somewhere in those early habits lies an hour that changed everything, an hour when a simple administrative task in ancient Sumer crystallized into humanity's first bureaucracy. The mainstream fact is foundational. Around 3500 BCE, in the city of Uruk, the world witnessed the emergence of proto-cuneiform writing. It began not with poetry or prophecy, but with ledgers, grain shipments, goat inventories, labor allotments. Among the earliest tablets is a peculiar administrative record, identified by catalog number W19408, whose symbols suggest a rapid correction and reallocation of resources. This tablet anchors our hour. But then comes the odd detail, the element scholars politely file under unusual. On the reverse side, normally left blank, someone pressed two mismatched impressions, one from a cylinder seal depicting a lion-headed eagle, and another from a seal that shouldn't exist at this date at all. This second seal bears a geometric pattern associated with much later dynasties. A few fringe theorists argue it indicates shared seals between distant cultures, others whisper that the impression was added during a ritual, not a transaction. Scholars still debate whether the seal mismatch reflects clerical error, symbolic meaning, or evidence of early trade with groups not yet formally recognized. What they agree on is the speed implied by the tablet's surface, multiple corrections in fresh clay before it had time to stiffen. Work compressed into a frantic, decisive hour. Imagine that hour. The sun is barely above the horizon, turning the mud brick walls of Uruk a soft ochre. The administrative chamber hums with movement. A scribe, young, thin, perhaps still apprenticed, kneels beside a basket of tablets drying in the shade. His reed stylus flicks across wet clay with practiced rhythm. He records the daily counts, 16 measures of barley, for goats, 7 laborers assigned to canal clearing. But something interrupts the flow. A supervisor rushes in, robes flaring with urgency. A shipment is late. A canal worker is missing. A rival household has claimed priority rights to the water gate. Suddenly the numbers on the tablet are wrong, dangerously wrong. The young scribe's heart races. He wipes a portion of the clay clean with the heel of his palm, re-smoothing the surface. The wet clay cools his skin. He corrects the figures, but before he can finish, a second official arrives with contradictory orders. The stylus scratches faster now. This is no longer routine, this is improvisation. At one point, the scribe flips the tablet, something only done when space runs out or when a task becomes too urgent to start anew. On the back, in haste or perhaps in silent appeal, he presses his own seal. But then a senior administrator grabs the tablet and adds his seal too, one with an emblem the young scribe has never seen. The pressure of the seal leaves a deep, confident impression. The meaning is obvious, this correction is final. Within minutes, orders are dispatched. Workers redirected. Grain rerouted. A single administrative hour reshapes the day's entire structure. When the tablet is later placed in a basket to dry, no one imagines it will survive millennia. No one imagines that scholars will one day photograph its faint fingerprints under ultraviolet light, marveling at the evidence of ancient stress, urgency, decision-making. No one imagines that the quiet panic of a Sumerian clerk will become a window into the birth of bureaucracy. But that is what the hour becomes, an early example of humans wrestling with complexity, responsibility, and the burden of record-keeping. An hour where writing ceased to be mere tally marks and became something more, the infrastructure of civilization. And as we leave that small, clay-scented room in Uruk, we carry with us the understanding that history is often shaped not by kings or warriors, but by clerks, those who turned chaos into order one stylus stroke at a time. The river that died suddenly. Some collapses roar across history like thunder, volcanoes, invasions, plagues. Others whisper, quiet as a reed bending in shallow water. And then there is the strange, unnerving hour when a river, lifeline of a Bronze Age settlement, simply stopped. No celestial omen recorded it, no desperate chronicle preserved it, yet the land itself holds the imprint of a moment when everything changed too quickly to understand. The mainstream fact is well documented. Near the ruins of Tel Leilan, in northern Mesopotamia, archaeologists discovered a sudden abandonment event around 2200 BCE, coinciding with a severe, decades-long drought known as the 4.2 kilo-year event. But buried beneath discussions of climate change and ancient collapse lies a smaller, more personal clue, an hour-long disruption captured in the soil itself. During an excavation trench along a former irrigation channel, researchers found a thin layer of silt and cracked clay, bordered above and below by smooth, wet river sediment. The contrast suggested something extraordinary. The water flow had halted abruptly, drying the channel for a brief moment, perhaps only an hour or two, before resuming. Amid this layer were abandoned tools, including a half-carved wooden sluice gate and a basket of fresh-cut reeds, left as if workers had dropped everything at the same time. Then comes the fringe-colored oddity. Embedded within the same dried layer, excavators uncovered a cluster of tiny fish skeletons, all oriented in the same direction, their bodies arched unnaturally. Some propose they were trapped in a sudden surge when the river restarted. Others argue they died in a shock wave of brackish water. But a minority suggests something more puzzling. that the fish exhibited the signature of a brief but violent pressure anomaly, the kind caused by a sudden atmospheric shift or distant seismic disturbance. Scholars still debate whether the river's momentary death was due to a flash drought, a localized collapse of an upstream dam, or a minor quake disrupting flow. But everyone agrees on the implication: whatever happened, it happened fast, and to people whose survival depended on water arriving exactly when expected. Imagine that hour. The late morning sun climbs over the plain, its heat already pressing against the skin. Workers stand ankle-deep in a familiar channel, repairing the gate that diverts water to barley fields. They chatter, laugh, wipe sweat from their brows. A boy carries a jug of fresh water to his father. A woman trims reeds for mat weaving, her hands deft and practiced. Then, silence. Not the soft hush of wind or the distant murmur of cattle. A different silence. The kind that makes every worker look up at the same moment. The water in the channel slows, shivers, then stops. The surface flattens into a polished mirror. Tools freeze midair. Someone mutters a nervous blessing. The boy stares into the stillness, confused. A worker wades forward, poking the water with a stick, as if urging it to move. Nothing. Another kneels, pressing his ear to the clay, listening for the river's heartbeat. Still nothing. The air feels heavy, electric. A bird takes flight, startled. Somewhere in the distance, a camel groans as though sensing something deep beneath the earth. People react quickly. They drop baskets, tools, reeds. A foreman runs toward the town, shouting for scribes, for priests, for anyone who might know what a silent river means. The workers stand uncertainly on the drying mud, watching cracks form under their feet, lines spreading like veins. Minutes pass. Anxiety thickens. Someone begins to pray. Someone else curses. And then, just as suddenly, a faint tremble ripples through the clay. A soft gurgle. A single bubble rising like a held breath being released. The water surges forward, too fast. The boy yelps and jumps back. Flow returns, more forceful than before, sweeping the fish into the channel, trapping them in a sudden burst. Tools float. The workers shout, a mix of relief and fright. The river lives again. But something has been revealed in its brief death: fragility, impermanence, the thin line between survival and collapse. That hour becomes a warning. When the settlement falls generations later, fields dry, walls crack, doors hang open in silence, the memory of the river's hour of stillness lies buried beneath the final layers. A whisper of the moment when nature first signaled the coming end. We find it now, a thin band of clay that chronicles one irretrievable hour, an ancient pulse misfiring, a civilization blinking. And the river's silence carries us forward into further mysteries. The pharaoh's missing hour. Across the desert plain, where the Nile bends like a luminous ribbon and the horizon shimmers with heat, ancient Egypt measured time with extraordinary precision. Sundials, water clocks, ceremonial calendars, every moment had its place in the cosmic rhythm. And yet, in the reign of a certain old kingdom pharaoh, there is an hour that simply disappears. Not overwritten, not explained, absent. A vanished interval sealed inside stone, leaving behind a quiet mystery that prickles at the edges of Egyptology. The mainstream fact is clear: within the pyramid complex of Djedkar-i-Sisi, a 5th dynasty ruler known for bureaucratic reforms and standardized temple rituals, archaeologists found a service chamber containing a set of daily ritual logs. These logs, carved in neat hieratic script on limestone fragments, outline actions performed for the pharaoh's cult: lighting incense, washing statues, presenting bread, reciting hymns. Each event is assigned a time marker based on shadow lengths and water clock intervals. But among these fragments lies a jarring inconsistency. Between two routine entries, purification of the sacred oil and offering of white linen, there is a temporal gap equivalent to 1 hour, left completely blank. No erased surface. No damage. Just nothing. The line where the hour's record should be is present, clear, carved, and intentionally left empty. Then comes the peculiar, fringe-colored detail. Beside the empty line is a tiny carved symbol of a feather, the same motif used in other contexts to indicate silence, judgment, or forbidden knowledge. Some suggest it marks an omitted ritual too sacred to record. Others argue it represents a mistake corrected through omission. But a more enigmatic theory proposes that the feather marks an event involving the pharaoh himself, an unscheduled, undocumented action that attendants were ordered never to describe. Scholars still debate whether the missing hour indicates a confidential royal rite, a response to an ill omen, or something as mundane as a moment of chaos in temple administration. But what unsettles researchers is how deliberate the emptiness feels, an hour recognized, acknowledged, and yet purposefully left unspoken. Imagine that hour. The sun has just begun its ascent, turning the limestone walls of the complex a warm, blushing pink. Priests move like shadows through the colonnade, their linen robes whispering against smooth floors. Incense smolders in narrow corridors, releasing curls of blue smoke that cling to the air like memory. A junior scribe kneels beside a stone slab, stylus poised, ready to record the next ritual step. Then, unexpected motion. Senior priests hurry toward the inner sanctuary, their expressions tense. Two guards close the doors behind them. The scribe hesitates, watching, unsure whether to follow or continue recording. From behind the heavy cedar panels comes a muffled chant, low, unfamiliar. It rises, falls, becomes breath, becomes echo. Minutes drag. A priest emerges briefly, pale, his hands trembling slightly. He sees the scribe's stylus hovering over the tablet and shakes his head with a subtle but urgent gesture. The scribe freezes. He is young, but he understands, this is not to be written. The hour feels stretched, strange. No sounds of recited hymns. No measured splashing of ritual water. Time here is normally choreographed with almost mathematical precision, but now, it stumbles, slows, becomes uncertain. Finally, the sanctuary doors open. The priests exit with rigid composure, though their faces betray relief or exhaustion, or perhaps fear. One adjusts his collar to hide scratch marks on his neck. Another wipes sweat from his brow though the morning air is cool. None speak. The scribe lowers his eyes. He returns to his tablet. The next ritual begins as though nothing unusual has happened. He draws the dividing line and leaves the hour's space pristine, untouched. A blankness more telling than ink. Centuries later, that blank line survives the collapse of dynasties, the theft of treasures, the weathering of sand-laden winds. We find it now, a silent interval that refuses explanation. In a civilization obsessed with order, this lone hour of omission stands like a whisper from behind sealed doors, a reminder that even the most illuminated societies harbor shadows. And as we step away from Jedkar's quiet void, we continue deeper into the hidden timetables of history, toward mysteries that unfold not in absence, but in arrival. The hour of the first sail. Long before triremes sliced the Mediterranean, before Phoenician traders traced the coastlines like veins, before Egypt or Akkad dreamed of naval empires, there was an hour when someone, somewhere, caught the wind in a woven cloth and let it pull them across water. An hour so small it barely rippled the surface, yet so monumental it reshaped humanity's reach. It is the hour of the first sail. The mainstream fact is drawn from shards of evidence scattered across the Arabian Peninsula, at the site of Hafid period settlements. Around 3000 BCE, archaeologists discovered pottery etched with tiny depictions of boats. Most are familiar, reed vessels, punted by poles or paddled by hand. But one shard is different. It shows a vessel with a diagonal line rising from the hull and a triangular mark above it. A mast. A proto-sail. But the shard alone isn't what captures the imagination. Nearby, beneath a collapsed hearth, a thin layer of salt crust overlays a peculiar arrangement of tools, bone awls, fiber bundles, and a wooden dowel charred at one end. These objects appear to have been abandoned mid-task, as if the craftsman left suddenly, then never returned. Then comes the fringe-colored oddity. Mixed with the hearth debris was a small clump of mineralized fabric, preserved by salt and heat. Under magnification, the weave pattern stunned researchers, alternating bands of tight and loose threads, a primitive attempt to create aerodynamic lift, far earlier than expected. Some believe it's coincidence. Others argue it's intentional engineering. And a few suggest it marks the hour when someone first realized the wind itself could become a tool. Scholars still debate whether this artifact represents a functioning sail, a symbolic depiction, or the remnants of an experiment abandoned in failure. Where consensus falters is precisely where wonder begins, the belief that a single hour may have changed maritime history forever. Imagine that hour. The morning sun blazes over the gulf, turning the water into hammered copper. The tide is low, revealing a narrow band of glistening sand where fishermen prepare their reed vessels. Nets drip with silver scales. Children leap across tidal pools, chasing crabs. But a short distance away, in a quieter stretch of beach, two artisans work on something unusual. A length of palm fiber cloth lies spread across the sand. One man holds a bundle of reeds tied in a V-shape, the other tests the tension of the woven fabric, pulling it gently, then sharply. Each time, the wind catches a corner, lifting the edge just enough to stir their curiosity. The older artisan crouches, eyes narrowing. He plants the charred wooden dowel upright in the sand, ties the fabric loosely around it, and steps back. A breeze rolls in from the open gulf, soft but steady. The cloth flutters, billows, strains against its knots. A moment of stillness. Then the fabric snaps outward, pulling the pole with a surprising force. Both men flinch as the dowel collapses. The younger bursts into excited laughter. The older simply stares, mind racing. It is the look of someone feeling the shape of a new idea, something that lives between instinct and discovery. They rebuild the setup, this time anchoring the pole with stones. A child wanders over, curious, only to be shooed away gently. The wind rises again. The cloth trembles, then swells, smooth and purposeful. The older artisan places his palm against the taut surface. He feels the wind pressing through the fabric, not chaotic, but directional. Guiding. Pulling. For the first time, he imagines a boat that does not depend on arms or paddles. A boat that moves because the world itself is moving. But the hour is brief. A cry echoes from the settlement. A pot has shattered in the hearth, scattering embers. People rush to contain the fire. The two artisans drop their experiment and run to help. When they return, the tide has risen, erasing their footprints and wetting the tools they left behind. The fabric clump soaks in salt water. The dowel darkens in the sun. They never finished the prototype. Centuries pass. Empires rise. True sails appear in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in the Indus Valley. But the seed was planted earlier, in that forgotten hour on a quiet shore. When archaeologists uncover the scattered remains, they find no completed sail, no finished mast. Only the quiet evidence of curiosity interrupted, imagination half-formed. Yet from these fragments emerges a revelation: innovation often begins not in triumph, but in interruption. And from this hour, the world gains the wind. The stones that echo at night. There are places where sound behaves strangely, where a whisper folds back on itself, where footsteps bloom into low, rolling thunder, where the air inside stone seems to breathe. One such place lies on a lonely plateau dotted with basalt columns, long misidentified as mere boundary markers. But when archaeologists finally surveyed the site at night, just once, just for an hour, they discovered an acoustic mystery older than many civilizations, and far harder to explain. The mainstream fact is this: near the ancient site of Beni Hassan in Middle Egypt, researchers recently documented a semicircle of basalt monoliths dating to roughly 2000 BCE. Each stone is narrow, upright, and angled slightly inward, forming what appears to be an open-air enclosure. Initially dismissed as an incomplete structure, the formation revealed its secret only when a research team returned after dusk to test sound dispersion patterns. That hour changed everything. When a single researcher clapped her hands in the center of the ark, the stones responded with a deep, resonant hum, an echo not delayed, but layered, as though the sound were traveling across multiple surfaces before returning to the listener. Further tests showed that certain frequencies doubled back sharply, producing the effect of a voice coming from behind the speaker, even in complete darkness. The sensation was unsettling, intimate, and unmistakably engineered. Then comes the odd, fringe-colored detail. Beneath one of the monoliths, diggers found a small ceramic vessel containing burnt frankincense and bits of pulverized malachite. More strangely, the vessel was sealed with a lid engraved with a pattern of radiating lines, exactly 12 of them, like spokes in a wheel. Some scholars suggest this was part of a ritual involving sound and vision. Others argue it was a coincidental deposit. But a minority believes the combination of incense, mineral powder, and acoustics indicates a sensory ceremony designed to induce trance or heightened awareness. Scholars still debate whether the stone's sonic behavior was intentional engineering or an extraordinary accident. But the consistency of the inward angles and the repeated use of basalt, a material known to resonate, has led many to suspect deliberate design. Imagine that hour, the hour recorded only in the memory of stones. The desert night is crisp and velvet dark, the air swirling with cold currents from the nearby cliffs. Torches flicker around the semicircle, throwing gold light across the basalt. A priest stands in the center, his cloak lined with beads that catch the fire's glow. Around him, a ring of acolytes kneels in silence, faces shadowed, waiting. He raises a small drum covered in taut animal hide. One slow strike. The sound rolls outward, then returns as a low vibration that shivers through the stones and settles into the bones of those present. The acolytes bow their heads. The priest closes his eyes and strikes again, faster, softer, coaxing the echoes into overlapping rhythms. The stones respond like a chorus, each one singing a slightly different tone. A breeze stirs the incense burning in the ceramic vessel at the priest's feet. The smoke coils upward, mingling with the hum. The malachite powder glints faintly in the torchlight, scattering flecks of green across the air. The acolytes sway, not from choreography, but from the resonance rippling through their chests. The priest murmurs a sequence of syllables, half chant, half breath, and the arc of stones throws his voice behind him, as though ancestors or deities were answering softly. This is not spectacle. This is calibration. The priest is listening for something, alignment, perhaps. A moment when the echoes synchronize in a perfect harmonic pulse. A moment when sound itself becomes a doorway. When it happens, he lifts his hands abruptly, signaling the others to rise. The echoes fade. The smoke thins. The hour ends. The next day, the wind erases footprints. The incense burns to dust. The priest returns to his daily duties. No inscription marks the ritual, no tablet records the purpose. Only the stones remember. Thousands of years later, when modern researchers recreate the nighttime tests, they experience the same uncanny resonance. The echoes wrap around them like unseen arms. Their own breath seems to move in circles. More than one scientist reports feeling watched, or accompanied, despite the empty desert around them. Whether this sensation is acoustics, psychology, or something more elusive is still debated. But the result is undeniable, an hour of sound long buried under silence, restored by accident, carrying whispers from a world where ritual and physics were not separate, but symbiotic. From this hour of echoing stones, we continue toward the darker thresholds of ancient time. The hour cities emptied. There are ruins that tell of slow decline, walls sagging over centuries, pottery accumulating in layers like sedimentary size. And then there are the other ruins, the ones where silence arrived abruptly, almost rudely. Pots left half-fired. Looms standing mid-weave. Footprints drying in clay as if the owners intended to return any minute. Somewhere in the late Bronze Age, across a constellation of settlements stretching from Anatolia to the Levant, an hour arrived when entire neighborhoods, sometimes entire towns, were abandoned in eerie synchrony. An hour in which cities emptied. The mainstream fact is measurable. Several sites, including Tel Tayanat, Hattusa, and small coastal settlements near modern-day Syria, show evidence of sudden depopulation around 1200 BCE. The layers do not show typical destruction, no scorch marks of invasion, no mass burials, no earthquake fracturing. Instead, archaeologists find rooms left intact, storage jars sealed but unused, and domestic objects placed as if carefully set aside. But the unsettling part is how these absences align. In 3 different locales, the final occupational surfaces show identical peculiarities: unfinished meals, a single dropped spindle whorl, and doorways left wide open, with wind-blown sediment accumulating evenly. As if residents stepped out during a calm hour, brief, unhurried, and simply never returned. Then comes the fringe-colored detail, the one that keeps excavation directors trading late-night theories. At 2 sites, researchers found clusters of small clay tokens, bean-sized spheres, cones, and discs, scattered in courtyards. These tokens are early accounting tools, precursors to writing. But their arrangement suggests they were dumped hastily, as if someone intended to count or redistribute goods but abandoned the task mid-action. A minority of scholars have speculated that these tokens might represent an emergency redistribution, a sudden civic reorganization, or perhaps a message, an encoded signal no longer decipherable. Scholars still debate whether the synchronous abandonment resulted from economic collapse, climate stress, mass migration, or rumors of an approaching enemy. But the lack of trauma, the almost serene orderliness of the spaces left behind, suggests something stranger, a collective decision made quickly, quietly, and with unsettling unity. Imagine that hour. The heat of late afternoon settles over a coastal town, the air thick with the scent of olives and seawater. Women weave linen in the shade of a courtyard, their fingers moving in steady rhythm. A potter fires jars in a kiln glowing orange at the base. Children chase each other through narrow lanes, their laughter rising above the faint rumble of waves. Then a runner appears, not frantic, not wounded, just breathless enough to draw attention. He murmurs something to the potter, who stiffens. He passes a message to a woman at the loom, who slowly sets her shuttle down. Whatever he says is not shouted, it is delivered quietly, almost gently. A warning? A prophecy? A decision? The loom stops mid-pattern. Threads hang loose, delicate as spider silk. The potter lifts a jar, still warm, just beginning to cool, and places it carefully beside the kiln. A child's laughter fades. Mothers call their children close, their voices soft but unwavering. A man kneeling beside a chest of tokens sweeps them into his hand, then pauses, hesitates, and lets them fall. The tokens scatter across the courtyard like spilled seeds. Doors open. Not slammed. Simply opened, as though to let out the heat. People gather only what they can carry, a cloak, a water skin, a charm made of bronze wire. No valuables. No herds. Nothing heavy. The movement unfolds with uncanny coordination, as if a signal had passed among them without sound. A breeze stirs dust into the courtyards. The runner waits at the edge of town while families assemble. No crying. No panic. Only the stillness that comes when the mind resolves itself quickly. They walk, not in a rush, but with purpose, across the plain toward higher ground, leaving shadows behind them like afterimages. By the time the sun dips, the town is silent. Fire in the kiln dies. The loom stands still. A single plate of barley porridge begins to cool. Crickets take over the soundscape. 1 hour. That's all it takes to turn a living city into a shell. Centuries later, archaeologists kneel in these rooms, baffled by the tidiness of abandonment. They search for bodies, for weapons, for ash. They find none. Just footprints that fade as suddenly as they appear. What happened in that hour? A rumor? A vision? A coordinated migration? Or the first tremor of a larger Bronze Age unraveling? Whatever it was, the silence it birthed is louder than destruction. And this quiet, collective disappearance leads us onward, to mysteries in the heavens themselves. When the stars refused to rise. For ancient peoples, the sky was not a backdrop, it was a calendar, a compass, a scripture written in fire. Generations planted, harvested, worshipped, traveled, and foretold by the rising and setting of familiar constellations. So when the stars behaved strangely, when a familiar pattern failed to appear at its appointed hour, the world below trembled. Across multiple early civilizations, tablets, petroglyphs, and temple alignments point to a single baffling window in antiquity, an hour when the stars simply refused to rise. The mainstream fact is consistent across regions. Around 1000 BCE, observers in Mesopotamia, the Levant, and the highlands of Anatolia recorded an anomalous astronomical event. In Babylonian star logs, a line tersely notes, "The watch was kept, no stars came." At an Anatolian rock sanctuary, alignment shafts meant to catch the first light of a specific star lay inexplicably empty that season, no beam struck the inner marker. And in a Phoenician coastal settlement, a bowl inscribed with navigators' marks shows a scratched-out transit path, replaced by a hastily redrawn line lower on the rim. These were not myths. They were data. Observations from people who depended on the night sky for everything from navigation to religious ceremony. But then comes the strange, fringe-tinted clue. At a modest site in eastern Anatolia, excavators uncovered a stone disk, about the size of a dinner plate, with small carved depressions representing stars. Oddly, one depression was filled with a compacted mix of charcoal, resin, and powdered hematite, as though someone attempted to darken or erase a specific star's spot. Below it, a scratched symbol, like a bent line, suggests uncertainty or disruption. Some interpret this as ritual damage. Others see it as an astronomer marking an observation failure. A few whisper it might represent panic, a star that did not appear where it should have. Scholars still debate whether the missing star hour corresponds to heavy atmospheric ash from distant volcanic eruptions, a rare dust veil blocking the horizon, or a transient celestial event now lost to time. But the simultaneity of the records hints that something was noticed broadly enough to leave intellectual shockwaves. Imagine that hour. It is late evening, and the air over the Euphrates is cool, carrying the scent of river reeds and distant heath fires. In a temple courtyard, a priest astronomer stands beside a simple gnomon, watching the eastern horizon darken into velvet. His apprentices sit cross-legged, tablets ready, waiting for the first star of the night, the one that begins the ritual calendar. The hour is familiar. Predictable. A rhythm older than memory. But tonight the horizon glows faintly red, unusual for the season. The priest narrows his eyes, calculating when the star should breach the edge of the world. A few moments pass. Then a few more. The apprentices look at the sky, then at him, confusion building silently. Still nothing. A faint breeze lifts dust from the courtyard floor. A dog whines. The priest adjusts his measuring rod, convinced he's miscalculated. But the shadow falls where it always does. His chest tightens. Minutes slip by. The expected star, normally sharp and punctual, is absent. Not dimmed. Absent. The horizon stays strangely bright, as if hiding something behind a thin veil. The apprentices exchange nervous glances. One whispers a question he shouldn't: has the star died? The priest clenches his jaw and says nothing. Around them, other watchers, boatmen, shepherds, night traders, begin lifting their faces toward the sky, sensing the wrongness even if they cannot name it. A hush spreads across the settlement, a communal breath held too long. When the star finally appears, late, distorted, flickering like a candle drowning in wax, the watchers break into anxious murmurs. It rises lower than expected, wobbling against the haze. The priest hastily scratches a correction into his tablet, the stylus trembling slightly. The apprentices copy the new angle, though each stroke feels like an admission that the world is not as stable as they believed. Elsewhere, in a Phoenician port, navigators redo their routes. In Anatolian sanctuaries, beams of starlight miss their intended altars. In small hilltop villages, elders whisper prayers to ward off omens. 1 hour, shared across miles of land and sea. When we return to these sites today, we cannot see the veil that confused the ancients. But we see their reactions carved into stone and clay. We see the fear of cosmic disorder, the dread that the heavens themselves might falter. It is a reminder that to early civilizations, the sky was not just a map. It was a promise. And for 1 hour, that promise broke. The echo of that celestial hesitation carries us now toward the ancient trade routes, where another mysterious hour reshaped economies across vast landscapes. The last hour of the Jade Road. Long before the Silk Road's shimmering caravans connected distant empires, there was another network, older, quieter, all but forgotten. A chain of mountain passes, river fords, and narrow forest trails stretching from the highlands of Central Asia to the valleys of northern China. Along this network, for thousands of years, people traded one of humanity's most sacred materials, jade. It was more than a gemstone. It was a symbol of eternity, a tool of diplomacy, a relic buried with kings. But abruptly, almost unnervingly, this ancient route ended. Not with war. Not with disaster. It ended in an hour. The mainstream fact is clear. Excavation sites near the Alatau mountain corridor reveal a dramatic cessation of jade movement around 1500 BCE. Workshops that once rang with the steady scrape of stone tools fell silent. Half-carved pendant discs remained on workbenches. Tools were laid neatly beside unfinished pieces, as if the artisans intended to return after a short break. But they never did. Then comes the odd, fringe-colored detail. At one highland workshop abandoned at this exact horizon, archaeologists discovered a cluster of jade cores, the heavy inner stones from which ornaments were shaped, arranged in a half-circle around a shallow pit. Inside the pit was a burnt offering, charred goat bones, fragrant herbs, and a polished jade bead intentionally cracked through its center. This was not typical ritual debris. It was deliberate. Symbolic. Some scholars believe the workers held a final ceremony before leaving. Others suspect a warning, or a mark of shame. A more controversial interpretation proposes that the cracked bead marks a severed agreement, an economic or spiritual contract broken abruptly. But scholars still debate whether this rupture was due to resource exhaustion, political upheaval, or an omen read in the sky, the earth, or the behavior of animals. Whatever the cause, the last hour of the Jade Road is preserved in exquisite, unsettling detail. Imagine that hour. The mountain air is thin, crisp, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant snowmelt. The workshop stands beneath a rocky overhang, protected from the wind. Inside, the artisans are at work. The rhythmic rasp of polishing fills the space, punctuated by murmured conversation. A boy rotates a jade bangle on a smooth river stone, smoothing its surface. An elder shapes a disc with a grooved tool, tracing a perfect circle. Beside him lies a nearly finished pendant, its surface gleaming with a soft green glow. Then someone arrives. A traveler, dusty, silent, eyes shadowed with urgency. He speaks quietly to the workshop leader. The artisans pause, waiting. The elder listens, face unreadable. When the messenger finishes, the elder places his unfinished disc gently on the bench. His hands tremble slightly. He nods once. The atmosphere changes. But not chaotically. Not with fear. With finality. The artisans gather behind the workshop, near the shallow pit used for ceremonial ash. They bring the jade cores first, symbolic anchors of their craft. They place them in a semicircle, each stone glinting faintly in the fading light. A woman adds a sprig of mountain herbs to the pit. A young apprentice brings the goat offering, freshly prepared. And finally, The elder steps forward with the polished jade bead. Its surface is flawless, except for the deliberate crack running through it. He holds it to the light, takes a slow breath, then drops it into the pit. Silence. A brief flame catches the herbs. Smoke rises, thin and fragrant, curling upward like a departing spirit. The group watches without speaking. When the smoke thins, they turn away. No one gathers tools. No one packs finished pieces. The workshop, alive seconds ago, lies behind them like a husk. The elder is the last to leave. He glances once at the unfinished disc on the bench, the jade bangle beside the boy's smooth stone, the tools lined neatly as always. He touches the doorway with the tips of his fingers, then steps into the cold mountain wind. They walk away. An hour later, the workshop stands utterly still, tools arranged, pieces abandoned, fires cooling. Snow begins to fall lightly, dusting the half-circle of jade cores. The Jade Road, once animated by generations of trade and craftsmanship, ends without a trace of violence. Only choice. When archaeologists uncover the site millennia later, they find no evidence of attack or catastrophe, just the solemn arrangement around the pit, the cracked bead, the quiet perfection of tools left in place. Why did they leave? Resource depletion. A political shift. A ritual taboo. Climate pressure. A celestial omen. Scholars still debate. No answer satisfies fully. But one truth remains: sometimes civilizations do not collapse, they walk away. And from this abandoned hour, we move toward the final mystery, an hour in which an entire empire sighed, shuddered, and let go. The hour history turned to dust. In the humid forests of Southeast Asia, where roots coil like serpents and temples rise from the undergrowth like bones pushed through skin, lies a city that once commanded an empire, Angkor. For centuries it was the beating heart of the Khmer civilization, a metropolis of engineers, astronomers, dancers, scholars, and kings. Its canals shimmered with moonlit reflections. Its reservoirs fed thousands. Its temples rivaled any monument on earth. And then, in a way so swift it defies expectation, the city exhaled, and emptied. Not in a final battle, not in a volcanic fury, but in a single quiet hour. The mainstream fact is measurable. Around the 15th century CE, Angkor's population dispersed, leaving behind monumental structures and perfectly aligned waterways. Tree roots grew through foundations, but the city itself shows no consistent signs of siege or mass death. Instead, LiDAR surveys reveal something subtle: entire residential blocks abandoned almost simultaneously, debris undisturbed, personal items left behind as though people meant to return. Then comes the eerie, fringe-colored detail. At one corner of Angkor Thom, near a lesser-known shrine, archaeologists found a cluster of ceramic offering bowls, each filled with river silt. The bowls had been carefully placed in a circle, still wet when abandonment began. But the silt inside each bowl contained a thin layer of burned rice husk, charred unevenly, as though exposed to a sudden, intense heat that didn't leave scorch marks on the stone around them. A ritual? A warning? Or the record of an environmental anomaly so brief it left almost no trace? Scholars still debate whether Angkor's fall was driven by political fragmentation, water system failure, prolonged drought, or the sudden flood pulses revealed by recent sediment cores. Yet the synchrony of abandonment, the unmistakable impression of a city that paused, gathered itself, and stepped away, suggests a moment of collective realization. A moment compressed into a single hour. Imagine that hour. The day begins hot, the kind of heat that hangs in the air like a shroud. Monks chant inside the sanctuary, their voices rising in calm, spiraling harmonics. Vendors arrange fruit in baskets along the shaded paths. Children splash at the edges of a canal, kicking up jade-colored water. Water wheels creak rhythmically, powered by the slow-moving flow. Angkor is alive, tired, perhaps, but alive. Then, something shifts. A tremor, soft, barely perceptible, runs through the ground. A monk stops chanting mid-syllable. A basket of mangoes tips over. Birds erupt from treetops in a frantic burst, their cries sharp and dissonant. A thin crack forms along the edge of a stone walkway, tiny but alarming in its precision. And then the water in the canal stops. Not gradually. Instantly. It becomes a flat, polished mirror, reflecting a sky that seems suddenly too white. People turn toward the great reservoirs, their faces creased with confusion. The air pressure dips, just enough for ears to pop. A smell rises from the west, dry, burnt, metallic. No one speaks. They don't need to. An hour begins that will rewrite the city. Families gather belongings with trembling speed. Monks extinguish candles. Craftsmen lay their tools across unfinished carvings. The air feels wrong, charged with a kind of hollowed-out stillness. A mother ties a scarf around her child's face as dust begins drifting through the trees. A group of elders confers near the shrine, voices hushed. They place offering bowls in a deliberate circle, pour silt into them, and light a thin string of rice husk. The smoke rises dark, unnatural, the heat disproportionate to the small flame. The signal is clear. They must leave. And they do. Not in panicked waves, but in steady, solemn movement. Southward. Toward safer rivers, simpler settlements, less ambitious dreams. Behind them, the city waits, not yet ruined, not yet forgotten, just waiting, as though it expects them to return any moment. But they never do. The hour ends. Angkor becomes a memory held by stones, trees, and the quiet breath of time. The basins dry. The monsoon shifts. Forests reclaim the avenues. Roots pry open carved faces until they smile with unintended serenity. Centuries pass. When archaeologists arrive, they find the bowls of silt. The unfinished statues. The sudden stillness of waterlines. The absence of struggle. Evidence not of collapse, but of release. A moment when history turned to dust, softly, silently, irrevocably. And with this final hour, the mosaic of vanished moments across our journey draws to a close. Conclusion. Across these 15 hours scattered through millennia, a quiet truth emerges: history does not always hinge on battles, inventions, or coronations. Sometimes it shifts in the space of a breath, a spark near a mammoth herd, a tremor beneath a riverbed, a whisper behind a pharaoh's closed doors. These hours, fragile and often invisible, leave imprints subtle enough to escape chronicles yet profound enough to redirect civilizations. They remind us that ancient peoples lived not in sweeping epics but in moments, decisions, fears, revelations, and rituals lasting only as long as a candle's flicker or the passing of a cloud. And when these moments align, across continents, across eras, they form the hidden architecture of our past. We inherit their mysteries piece by piece, listening for echoes in clay, stone, bone, and silence. And in doing so, we rediscover the humanity that shaped the world, 1 hour at a time.